The forest didn't speak much. It creaked with wind, rustled with birds, and whispered across the pine needles, but it never asked questions. It simply listened. And Calder Boone had grown used to that kind of quiet. After all, he'd lived with it for over 10 winters. His cabin sat at the edge of the Bitterroot Mountains, tucked deep enough into the timber that no one ever passed through unless they meant to. A single woodpile, a smoking chimney, and the sound of an axe splitting logs like a heartbeat. He liked it that way, or at least that's what he'd told himself for years. Calder wasn't old, but life had aged him. 39, strong as the pine beams above his hearth, quiet as snowfall. The kind of man who fixed things instead of talking about them, and who knew how to survive a blizzard without flinching. But he hadn't spoken to another soul in weeks, maybe months. His only company was an old hound named Whiskey, who understood him better than most men ever had. Then came the knock. It was timid, soft, hesitant. Calder froze. No one knocked here. They either stormed in or stayed out. He opened the door slowly, axe still in hand. There, standing in the snow, wrapped in a threadbare shawl, was a woman, eyes red, face pale, wind-bitten hands holding the shoulders of a trembling girl, a tired boy, and a baby wrapped in wool. She spoke first. I don't want to trouble you, she said, but we've nowhere else to go. Calder blinked. Words didn't come easy. The girl coughed. The boy shivered. The woman, probably his age, maybe younger, stood firm, even though her knees looked ready to buckle. Where's your wagon? He asked gruffly. Gone, she said. Stuck between 2 oaks 3 miles east. Axle split. We walked. You walked, he repeated. With 3 children, she nodded. Calder glanced down at the baby, pink cheeks, barely stirring. Whiskey whined behind him. The wind picked up. He stepped back and opened the door wider. Get in. Inside, the cabin was warm, if plain. A fire burned low in the stone hearth. Calder gestured to the bench near it. The woman ushered the children in, settling them close to the flame. Her hands trembled as she pulled off her gloves. He poured water into a tin cup and handed it to her. She took it without a word. They sat in silence for several minutes, only the crackling fire and the baby's soft breaths between them. Finally, Calder asked, "What's your name?" She looked up. "Mara Linley," she said. "Widow, mother of 3, and I reckon a burden you didn't ask for." Calder stared into the flames. "I didn't ask for company either," he said, "but sometimes it finds you anyway." The storm rolled in hard that night. Snow slammed against the cabin walls, piling quick and heavy. The trees groaned under the weight. But inside Calder Boone's cabin, the fire held steady, and for the first time in weeks the little house was full. 3 children slept on a patchwork rug by the hearth. Calder had given up his bedroll for the baby's crib and laid out what blankets he had. Mara Linley sat in the rocker near the stove, eyes rimmed with wear but unblinking, like if she let herself rest too long, the dream might vanish. Calder poured water from the kettle into a tin mug and offered it to her. She took it with both hands. "Thank you again." He gave a quiet nod, leaning against the wall, arms crossed. "How long you been out there?" he asked. 10 days, she said softly. "We left near Deer Hollow. Thought we could make it to my cousin's place by the river. I buried my husband 2 weeks before that." Calder's jaw shifted, but he didn't speak. Mara added, "He caught fever, took him fast, left me with debts and no home." She didn't say it with bitterness, just fact. "I didn't come here to stay," she added, "just to not die." The next morning, Calder was up before dawn, as always. He moved around the cabin with practiced care, stoking the fire, chopping kindling, making coffee. Mara stirred on the rocker, blinking sleep from her eyes. "Your children are quiet sleepers," Calder said. She half smiled. "They learn not to cry when they're cold." He didn't know what to say to that, so he didn't. Instead, he handed her a tin plate with warm cornbread and a few strips of dried meat. "For you," he said. "They've already eaten." Her eyes widened. "You cooked?" He shrugged. "Fire did most of the work." By midday, the wind had calmed. Mara stepped outside with the children, helping them gather snow in old pots to melt for water. The girl, Ella, was 9, smart-eyed and watchful. The boy, Jonas, was 6, with a deep quiet to him that reminded Calder of himself. The baby, Ruthie, clung to her mother's shawl, cooing softly. "They're good kids," Calder said to Mara as they worked by the woodshed. "They're everything I've got left," she replied. He nodded, handing her a bundle of firewood. "You don't owe me anything, but if you're going to be here through winter, might as well help stack the wood." Mara arched a brow, a trace of challenge in her tone. "You always this hospitable?" Calder almost smiled. "Only when the house fills itself." That night, Mara tucked the children in and sat near the fire, staring at the flames. "You know," she said, "I don't expect anything more than a roof and some time to think." "You've got both," Calder said simply. She turned to him. "And what about you?" He looked out the frost-fogged window for a long moment. "I was never expecting anything at all." The days that followed stitched themselves into a rhythm. Mornings began with the smell of wood smoke and the sound of boots by the fire. Calder split logs out back. Mara boiled oats with a little honey he hadn't touched in years. The children swept the floor, gathered snow to melt, and took turns feeding Whiskey, who, despite his name, had taken up guard duty near Ruthie's cradle. No one called it home, but it felt a little like it. On the fourth day, Mara joined Calder at the chopping block. "I've got two good hands," she said, tying her hair back. "I don't like sitting idle." Calder handed her a smaller axe without a word. She set to it with care. Awkward at first, then steady. "You've done this before," he said. "My father ran a farm. He used to say if a man ever left me, I'd still have warm feet and firewood." Calder didn't reply. He just split another log, fast and clean. That night, as snow fell soft and slow, Calder sat near the hearth, carving a length of cedar. Mara watched from across the room, Ruthie asleep on her chest. "What are you making?" she asked. He didn't look up. "Don't know yet. You always carve things you don't name?" He glanced at her then. "Sometimes the shape finds itself." She smiled. "I like that." Later, once the children were asleep, Mara stood at the doorway, staring out into the snow-covered dark. "I never planned on being here," she said quietly. "Not in Montana, not in some man's cabin, not starting over again." Calder stood beside her, the silence between them thick, but not cold. "You didn't plan it," he said, "but you made it here. That counts for something." She turned to him, something soft in her expression. "And what about you? What were you planning?" He looked out into the woods. "To finish winter, same as always." "Alone?" "Didn't think I had much choice." Mara's voice lowered. "Maybe now you do." The next morning, Calder found something on the table, a small piece of cloth stitched tight at the corners. Inside, a button he'd lost months ago, and a note written in careful, uneven handwriting. "Thank you for not turning us away, Ella." Calder stared at it longer than he meant to, then folded it carefully and slipped it into the cedar box beneath his bed. He didn't know it yet, but he'd just started keeping family. The snow kept falling. Not hard, not cruel, but steady, like it had made peace with the land. And inside Calder Boone's cabin something else was settling too. Not permanence, but presence. Mara began humming when she worked, soft tunes from her childhood, half lullaby, half prayer, the kind of melody that made even the walls seem to lean in closer. Calder didn't say anything the first time he heard it, just paused by the woodpile, then kept on splitting. But by the third morning, he found himself listening for it, like the rhythm of a thing that meant the day was starting right. Ella asked Calder to show her how to whittle. "You've got quiet hands," she said. "Mama says that means you're careful." He raised a brow. "Your mama says a lot." "She's usually right," Ella replied. Calder chuckled, handing her a small piece of pine. "Watch your thumb. Blade's honest, but it doesn't know your skin from bark." Jonas followed Calder everywhere. Never said much, but watched everything. How to check a trap, how to tie a knot, how to mend the smallest hole in a boot. Calder gave him a broken snare to fix. The boy brought it back mended 3 days later. "Could have done better," Jonas mumbled. Calder nodded. "So could I. That's how you know it matters." And Ruthie, barely crawling, started reaching for Whiskey's tail, giggling each time he huffed and flopped away dramatically. Mara laughed with her, sometimes until her shoulders shook. "Didn't think she'd laugh again," she said one night as she tucked Ruthie in. "Not like this. Not this soon." "She's warm," Calder said, handing her a fresh quilt. "And safe." Mara looked up at him. "I didn't think I'd ever be again, either." One evening, Calder brought down a wooden box from a high shelf. Inside were a few items wrapped in linen, a silver comb, an old photo, and a book of pressed wildflowers. "My mother's," he said. "This cabin was hers before it was mine." Mara traced a fingertip over the photo. 2 women standing on a porch, wind in their hair, arms locked. "She looks strong," she said. "She was," Calder replied. "Taught me to build a fire before I could spell my own name." Mara closed the box gently. "You ever lonely out here before us?" Calder stared at the hearth, the fire casting gold across his face. "I didn't notice I was until I wasn't anymore." That night, as snow covered the pines in silence, Mara lit a small candle on the windowsill. "What's that for?" Calder asked. She hesitated, then smiled. "A light, in case anyone's lost out there like we were." He didn't speak. But the next morning, he built a small shelf beneath the window, just wide enough for a second candle. Weeks passed, and the world outside the cabin held its breath beneath thick snowdrifts. But inside, life bloomed slowly and quietly, like pine needles pushing through frost. Calder had never known how much sound children made. Not loud, not bothersome. Just life sounds. The shuffle of Jonas's boots as he followed behind. Ella's soft humming while she swept. Ruthie's delighted squeal when she caught Whiskey's ear for the 100th time. And Mara's voice in the morning, low and clear as she read to the children from an old worn Bible with frayed corners. Not sermons, just stories. Names that felt ancient and comforting. One afternoon, the wind stilled. The sky was pale and kind. Calder and Mara stood outside, watching the children roll a crooked snowman near the edge of the clearing. "He's missing an arm," Jonas muttered, half apologizing. "Some men live with less," Calder said. "Doesn't mean they don't stand tall." Jonas blinked at him, then nodded. That night, after the children slept, Mara stayed at the fire longer than usual. Calder sat at the table carving a handle for the old coffee pot. She watched his hands move quiet and steady. "You always this patient?" she asked. He smirked. "I'm not patient. I'm slow." She laughed, soft and sudden. Calder glanced up, surprised by the sound. "I missed your laugh," he said. Mara paused. "I missed it too." A long silence stretched between them. Not uncomfortable. The kind that filled the room like heat. Then Mara said, "You ever think this was supposed to happen?" "Us. Here." Calder didn't answer right away. Instead, he set the carving down, wiped his hands, and said carefully, "I think this cabin was waiting for someone to bring the rest of it back to life." Mara's eyes shimmered, not with tears, but something gentler. She stood, pulled her shawl tighter, and stepped toward him. "Not too close, not yet, but close enough." "Good night, Calder." "Night, Mara." When she left the room, Calder sat in the stillness for a long time, hands resting on the table. Then he reached for the piece of cedar he'd begun carving weeks ago. He finally knew what it was becoming. A cradle rail, not because anyone asked him to, but because it felt right. By late January, the forest began to shift, not thawing yet, but waiting to. The light changed. The birds grew quiet. And Calder noticed things more clearly. Mara's fingers stayed red longer after doing laundry in the stream. Jonas had outgrown his boots, and Ella had started asking more questions. Grown-up ones. One morning, Calder was mending the chicken coop door when Ella approached, clutching her coat too tight. "Can I ask you something?" He set the hammer down. "Always." She kicked the snow with her toe. "Are you going to marry Mama?" He blinked. "That's a mighty big question." "I know," she said quickly, "but I hear the way she talks to you. It's not like the way she used to talk to Pa." Calder knelt down so his eyes met hers. "I care about your mama," he said. "A lot. But I won't ever make her do something just because it's expected, or because it looks right." Ella nodded slowly, biting her lip. "She deserves someone who doesn't leave." Calder's chest tightened. "She deserves everything," he said. That night, Mara found Calder near the woodshed, sharpening an axe by lantern light. "You're quiet today," she said. "Your daughter asked if I was going to marry you." Mara blinked. "She what?" "She's braver than I am, I'll admit that." Mara leaned against the post, folding her arms. "And what'd you say?" "That I wouldn't ever ask for something unless it was freely given." Silence stretched between them. Then she spoke, barely above a whisper. "I've had promises made to me before, Calder. They were easy to say, hard to keep." "I don't make easy promises," he replied, "but I can give you something steadier." Mara stepped forward, eyes steady and soft. "Like what?" "A roof that doesn't fall, a fire that stays lit, a man who doesn't run." He added, "But only if you want that." She took a long breath. "I don't want a rescuer, I want a partner." Calder nodded once. "Then that's what I'll be." Inside, the children were already asleep. The baby snored softly, curled in the quilt Mara had stitched by firelight. She and Calder stood in the doorway, not touching. But something passed between them. Not the start of love, the recognition of it. Outside, snow began to fall again. But this time, it landed on a home, not just a cabin. A home. The snow finally slowed, and with it came the first sign of the season turning. A single drip, then another. Water slid down from the eaves of the cabin, quiet as breath. Somewhere beneath the crust of ice in the creek, the current began to stir again. Spring wasn't here yet, but it was coming. Calder took the children on short walks, teaching Jonas how to spot animal tracks in the snow, how to walk softly, even when boots crunched. Ella rode on a makeshift sled, pulled by Whiskey, who was far too old for it, but tolerated the duty with exaggerated sighs. Mara stood at the cabin door, hand over her heart, watching them disappear into the pines. She didn't call after them. She didn't feel the need. She trusted them to return. That was new. That evening, Calder returned with a small pouch of stones and feathers. "For Ruthie," he said. "For when she walks, she'll need a rattle." Mara stared at it, eyes wide, voice caught. "You made this?" "I made it for a girl who laughs even when the world's still frozen." She reached out slowly, took the rattle in both hands. "I used to believe there'd never be anyone who saw them like I did," she said quietly. "Now I wonder if you see them better." Calder met her gaze. "Maybe because I see you too." That night, by the fire, Jonas curled up in Mara's lap. Ella rested her head on Calder's knee while she read aloud, and Ruthie, barely a year old, tugged at the fringe of his shirt. No one said anything about it. It just was. Later, when the children were asleep, Calder poured 2 cups of tea and sat beside Mara on the bench near the hearth. "I keep thinking," she said, "how strange it is. The place I feared would be the end of us turned out to be the place we began." He didn't speak for a moment, then said softly, "It's not strange, it's grace." She looked over, searching his face. "Do you ever wonder if you're allowed to have that?" "All the time," he answered. "But I think the trick is taking it when it shows up at your door." Mara smiled. "Then you should know. I didn't just walk into your cabin, Calder." She reached for his hand. "I chose to stay." He laced his fingers through hers. And for the first time in his life, Calder Boone believed he wasn't alone anymore. Not just in the woods, but in the world. The frost cracked and melted, inch by inch. The forest shed its white coat, and brown earth returned, soft and living beneath their boots. Sap ran in the trees. Birds began to sing again, and the cabin, once so still, now pulsed with warmth that had nothing to do with fire. One morning, Calder stepped out and found Ella and Jonas sitting on the porch with pencils and paper. "What you doing?" he asked, brow lifted. Ella grinned. "Making a list." Jonas added, "Of what we'd need, if this was our place now." Calder knelt. "Isn't it already?" Ella hesitated. "Mama says not to assume." Calder paused, then said carefully, "Well, if you want it to be, I reckon we'll need some nails, lumber, and a new roof line." Jonas beamed. "You mean it?" "I don't say things I don't mean." Inside, Mara was washing clothes in the basin when Calder entered. She looked up at him with that quiet question in her eyes. "They're planning additions," he said. "Guess I ought to start digging post holes." Her hands stilled. "You're ready to build for us?" Calder stepped closer. "No," he said softly. "I'm ready to build with you." They worked side by side for days, raising fence posts, marking out where a root cellar could go, repairing leaks in the cabin roof that had gone ignored when Calder lived alone. It wasn't just construction. It was claiming. At supper one night, as the children laughed over spilled gravy and Ruthie smeared mashed potato in her hair, Mara looked around the table. "This is what I thought I'd lost," she whispered. Calder caught her eyes. It was never gone, just waiting. He took her hand outside afterward, walking her down the trail behind the cabin, where spring flowers had begun to bloom in wild, reckless colors. He stopped beside a cedar he'd planted years ago, alone. "I always wondered if this tree would outlive me," he said. "But now I think it was just waiting for the right roots to grow around it." Mara touched its bark, heart full. Then she turned to him. "I want to stay," she said, "but not just as a guest, not just as a woman passing through." Calder stepped forward. "Then stay as what you are, ours." He cupped her face in both hands. "You, Ella, Jonas, Ruthie, you didn't break into my life, Mara. You made it worth living." She kissed him under the cedar tree. "No rush, no fear. Just the quiet certainty of two people choosing not just love, but life." Spring came all at once. The snow vanished in a matter of days. Buds burst from the tips of the pines. The stream behind the cabin ran fast and clear, and the mornings no longer bit at their skin when they stepped outside. It was as if the land had waited for them to make their choice, then, finally, exhaled. And Calder Boone was no longer a man living alone. He built a swing beneath the old tree. Jonas helped him with the ropes while Ruthie squealed nearby. Ella painted wildflowers along the porch railings, purple, yellow, soft blue. "She's turning this place into a home," Calder said, watching her. "She's only finishing what you started," Mara replied, brushing sawdust from her skirt. Word reached them by way of a traveling tinker that Mara's old town had changed hands. A new preacher, new mayor. No one there asked after her anymore. "No debts?" Calder asked. "None," Mara answered, then added with a smile. "And no strings either." Calder handed her a small leather pouch later that week. Inside was a silver pin shaped like a mountain bloom. "I never had much to give," he said, "but this says what I don't always know how to." She opened the pouch with slow hands. "What does it say?" "That you're here and you're not going anywhere unless you choose to." Mara held it tight against her chest. "I choose to stay," she whispered. They marked the change without fanfare. No preacher, no vows, no paper. Just a meal shared on the porch, with hands held tight. A song Mara sang softly to the children. A cedar post placed beside the garden with 5 names carved on its face. "Boone, Mara, Ella, Jonas, Ruthie." Calder watched as Ella ran her fingers over the grooves. "Does this make us official?" she asked. He smiled. "No, but it makes us true." Later that evening, as stars broke across the sky like diamonds, Calder pulled Mara close outside the cabin door. "I thought I'd built this place for silence," he said. "You did," she replied, resting her head against his chest. "But it made room for love anyway." And the forest around them, quiet but never empty, seemed to agree. It had waited long enough. And now, the house was full. Years passed the way they do when life is honest, slow at first, then all at once. Jonas grew taller than Calder by 16. Ella took to sketching wildflowers in the margins of every book Mara kept in the kitchen. And Ruthie, barefoot and bold, claimed the woods as her own long before her first full sentence. But the cabin stayed, and so did they. They added to it room by room. A lean-to for drying herbs, a window facing east so Mara could rise with the sun, and a porch that held 5 chairs instead of 2 for morning coffee and stories with calloused hands and warm hearts. Calder still rose early, still chopped wood, but sometimes, when he finished, he'd pause by the cedar tree out back, where 5 names remained carved in wood, weather-worn but not faded. He'd run a finger across the lines and whisper thanks, not because he had to, but because he still couldn't believe this life was real. One spring evening, Mara stood at the kitchen table, a fresh loaf cooling beside her. She glanced out the window to see Calder helping Ruthie saddle her pony. His beard had gone silver at the edges, his back still straight, but slower. He looked up, caught her watching, smiled. She smiled back, no words. They didn't need them anymore. Later, as the sun sank low and firelight glowed soft through the windows, Mara sat beside him on the porch swing, a blanket over both their knees. "You ever miss the quiet?" she asked playfully. Calder looked out across the clearing, where laughter echoed from the garden, where Ella's sketches lined the cabin walls, where the old dog's collar now hung by the door in quiet memory. He shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "I used to think I wanted quiet, but what I wanted was peace." Mara leaned her head on his shoulder. "And you found it?" He nodded once. "I built it, with you." And so the cabin that once stood alone no longer waited. It had been filled. Not by accident, not by mercy, but by love freely chosen. And like the cedar tree behind it, that love grew tall, deep-rooted, wind-worn, and still standing strong.